Hello and welcome to the BloodStream podcast, a show serving the greater bleeding disorders community, brought to you by Believe Limited and BloodStream Media, and made possible thanks to our presenting sponsor, Takeda. I'm your patient advocate and host, Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm your guest host and blood brother, Mark Pangilinan. Always here to remind you to please speak with a healthcare professional before making any treatment decision.
Good idea, Mark. On today's show, it's part 3, the finale of our BloodStream podcast, Blood Brother Collaboration, featuring the voices of over 15 blood brothers from around the country. Mark co-hosted the discussion with me and now joins me here in studio for the finale.
I'm sad that it's here, but this has been such a blast, Patrick. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here.
Of course, it's been a blast indeed. We also have the latest installment of our gene therapy segment made possible by CSL Behring. We've got all that and more. Welcome to BloodStream. If you like what you hear, or as Amy would say, even if you don't, please share this episode on social media. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the BloodStream podcast wherever you listen. We'd also graciously accept any reviews you might care to leave in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get podcasts. And I do want to remind you, dear listeners, that the BloodStream podcast is indeed made possible by our presenting sponsor, Takeda. Yes, that's right, Takeda. Takeda's got this website, bleedingdisorders.com, where you can learn all about Takeda's resources for and commitment to the bleeding disorders community. Mark, Takeda believes in a world free of bleeds.
They share the dream of the community.
They sure do, and they're dedicated more than ever in their efforts to offer a wide range of programs and support to help patients throughout their treatment journey, wherever on that journey they may be. And you can learn more by simply visiting bleedingdisorders.com. One more time because it's in my script, bleedingdisorders.com. And for their founding and ongoing support of the BloodStream podcast, I would just like to say thanks, Takeda. So, Mark, here we are, part 3. And I'm curious, as you know, we've got our 4 priority topics for discussion. As a reminder for our listeners, complicated grief, being new to the community, wearing multiple hats, and challenges across the lifespan. 3 out of 4 of those got some good airtime, but we didn't hear much about being new to the community. And spoiler alert, we won't on this part either. And that's fine. There was plenty to discuss. But Mark, I'd like to give you the chance to speak to anyone who is new or new-ish to the community who may be looking for some support. Where should they go? What was most helpful for you when you were entering the community, or what would you have liked to have had at the time? What do you have to say to anybody new to the community?
Thank you so much, Patrick. I really appreciate you making sure that we have time to discuss this. Honestly, I was new to the community later in life. I entered the community, I'd say, when I was 26. I have severe hemophilia A. I got diagnosed at birth, so I went through, up until my mid-20s without a community. And I will say, honestly, it was overwhelming. I felt like I had a good handle on my bleeding disorder. I felt like I was able to kind of do the things that I wanted to do physically. I felt proud of myself for being able to manage my condition on my own. What really spurred me to get into the community was I was turning 26. I was being kicked off my parents' insurance. This is 12 years ago at this point. And I was scared. I didn't know how to manage that part of my bleeding disorder, health insurance. That was always taken care of by my parents. I always had some idea of it, that I would need it, but just to enter it and have to account for it myself was a scary thing for me. So that spurred me to get into the community. I Googled, patient organizations or hemophilia support groups. I found the one that was local to my area, the New York City Hemophilia chapter, which I actually later became a full-time staff member of. But I will say it was very overwhelming in the way that there was a whole system, or what I call a whole hierarchy of bleeding disorders. There was national organizations, the local organizations. There were these things called specialty pharmacies that would deliver drugs, whereas in my experience, I'd only gotten it from the hospital, my treatment center that I went to. They would reach out to me, ask me if I need medication, and they would take care of it. All of a sudden, there's what felt like hundreds of different companies offering the same thing that I'd never heard of, a whole new world. And I also mentioned the pharmaceutical manufacturers, seeing them at events. And there were guys who, had grown up in the community. They had wanted to kind of take me under their wing. And I was resistant at first, to be honest. I felt like, I'd gone through my life Without this, I'd been able to thrive. Did I really need this? And I'll be honest, I took about a 4-year break. I was involved heavily for 6 months when I was 20, after I turned 26 or during that period. And then it just became too much for me to manage all of these new relationships and this new world that I felt like I had to understand that I wasn't part of, that I felt sort of like an outsider. And then 4 years later, after a break that I took a break, I found a reason to find connection. I was turning 30. I just lost my job. I had wanted to do something a little different. And when I was 30 and I got laid off from my job, had to deal with loss of health insurance. I wanted to do something a little different in my life. I wanted to travel for long term. And I'd met somebody 4 years prior who had done something similar. So I selfishly reached out to that person for insights. And that actually turned out to be the moment or the turning point for me in my involvement professionally and personally with bleeding disorders. That person was going to volunteer at the first medical camp in the Philippines, which is where my family's from. And it was one of those kind of aligning of my personal life and professional life. And ever since then, I've been able to have experiences that I never would have if I didn't involve in the community. Obviously, my work here at the Hemophilia Federation of America, but also my work in the local organizations. I've worked on the industry side as well, been exposed to opportunities like this podcast to be able to talk about things that are personal to me in this way. Just so many opportunities. And if I was to say someone who is new or thinking about it, first and foremost, it's okay to be overwhelmed. It's okay to not jump right in. It's okay to sit back and just absorb everything. See if it's if you're in a place where you're open to receiving it, because that's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
If you're not open to receiving it, it will never feel right. Or if you try to force yourself to do so. So it's okay, first and foremost. Second is, if you know what you're looking for, seek those out first. See what level of support or what level of resources you're able to access. And if it helps, where you find like, yeah, this was great, build upon that. Take it slow. There will always be, always something special about being introduced to something brand new, and you may jump right in. That's amazing if that's how you feel. But for people who tend to dip their toe in the water first, that's okay too. This is your community. This is your condition. It's your right how you manage it. Being part of the community is an aspect of that as well.
I think that's great advice. And thank you for sharing some of your personal story in there too. It's helpful to hear you say like it's okay to be overwhelmed. I think that's really good to hear. So thank you for sharing that. We'll return to our Blood Brotherhood conversation in just a little bit, but first over to Hannah Berry with the latest from our gene therapy segment.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Gene Therapy, A Whole New World, the podcast where we leap headfirst into breakthroughs, big ideas, and the future of hemophilia care. It's your girl, Hannah, and today we're officially putting on our space helmets because we're exploring the unknown, where gene therapy is headed next, where it could unlock, and how it might pave the way for other rare bleeding disorders. We've got two of the best guides for this future-forward adventure, Dr. Margaret Ragney and Dr. Richard Lemons, here to help us discover the science, the progress, and the what's coming next of gene therapy. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. It's a Whole New World Gene Therapy segment brought to you by CSL Behring and their Hemophilia B gene therapy treatment. To learn more about gene therapy, hear patient stories, and view additional support resources, visit beyondhemb.com or download B Support wherever you get your apps for more information and to manage your treatment journey. Over 500 people with hemophilia have now received gene therapy in clinical trials worldwide, and we're continuing to learn from every single one of them. In fact, the new 5-year end-of-study results from the HOPE-B trial were just released and also published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and wow, they are big. But we'll get into that in a moment. First, let's start with what patients actually feel after gene therapy. Here's Dr. Ragney.
what they notice immediately is they feel better because they're not having any more bleeds. Okay. And that almost flavors everything that comes after the gene therapy. They are quality of life hugely better. Do they still have some aching here and whatever there? Yes. But and how much does it go down? My sense with a very small number is that yeah, maybe it does. But for some patients there may be residual issues. I don't want to give you a one story fits all kind of thing, because I think that's going to be a very variable thing. But the most impressive thing to me is the joy they have. They can play with their kids without worry that they're going to get another joint bleed, or they can go to work and feel like they're not. One of my guys was a policeman. He felt like he could go to work without, or not a policeman, excuse me, an ER. He was a medic or an emergency room. He was on the spot, and he would work through terrible bleeds and then come home after a terrible weekend and then treat it.
Man, I love how Dr. Ragney describes this. Real joy, real freedom, but also real variability. And that's important because not every patient responds in the exact same way. But we can look at the big picture data to understand trends. Do you remember that HOPE-B study I mentioned? Well, the 5-year follow-up just wrapped up, and here's what we learned. Annualized bleeding rates dropped from 4.16 to 1.52%. Factor IX usage went down by 96%. And factor IX levels stayed steady, around 36% to 41% for 5 years straight. No late liver toxicity, no AAV-related cancers. 50 out of the 54 participants stayed in long-term follow-up. And people with AAV antibodies responded similarly to those without them. So while response vary person to person, the long-term trend we're seeing is durability, stability, and fewer bleeds. Now, to understand how this all works, let's jump to Dr. Lemons.
This is a gene transfer treatment. So we're transferring in a normal copy of the factor IX gene into the target organ that normally produces factor IX. In this case, it's the liver hepatocytes. So we're transferring in a normal copy of the factor IX gene into the liver hepatocytes that enables those cells in to use this normal copy of the factor IX gene to produce factor IX protein, which is then secreted into the bloodstream to allow the patient to then have a higher level of factor IX than they might normally have. In particular, for a patient with severe hemophilia, their factor IX level baseline is between 0 and 1%, where normal would be between 40 and 150%. Moderate patients have levels between 1 and 5%, and then mild between 5 and 40%. So the long-term, the 4-year long-term results were recently released by CSL, who's a sponsor along with Unicure of the gene therapy for hemophilia B. So we have 4-year data for the phase 3 HOPE-B trial that was initiated back in 2020. And then we also have some longer-term data, 6-year data, for the phase 2B trial that involved just 3 patients. So 3 patients were treated initially in the phase 2B trial to look at safety and efficacy. All 3 patients responded very well. And then 2 years later, the phase 3 larger trial of 54 participants took place. What the most remarkable thing is, I think, is that the mean factor IX levels have been durable and sustainable and very consistent over that 4-year period from year 1 to year 2, year 3, and year 4. Year 1, the factor IX level was 41.5%, so in the normal range. Year 2 is 36.7, year 3, 38.6, and year 4, 37.4. So we haven't really seen a change in that factor IX level. And that may be due to several things. Also, the safety data is very favorable as well. So these patients have done remarkably well.
That consistency Dr. Lemons described, the HOPE-B data really backs it up. 5 years in, those factor IX levels basically held their line year after year after year. And that's a huge deal when we're talking about the long-term horizon of gene therapy. But of course, science never stops at good enough. Researchers are shooting for more precise, more customizable, and maybe one day even reversible approaches. Let's head back to Dr. Ragney for where the next big wave might come from.
So in animals, mice, rodents, what have you, that are really en route to, if they are successful, being new novel approaches where they're a little more easily delivered. Some of these new RNA technologies, this CRISPR-Cas9, where you could actually take a patient and see what their factor VIII defect is and make a piece of DNA that repletes what they're missing. So in other words, almost like cut out what's not working and put in what is. And it sounds simple, paste and snip or cut and snip or whatever you want to call it. But it is the reality of what the potential is. And if it is effective, it could potentially also just be a local issue, or that you could take it out, fix it up, put it back in, and avoid some of the systemic problems. And time will tell what works best and all of those other things. It would also potentially mean you could do it in anybody, whether they were younger or older or what have you, or if they had an inhibitor. So I think there are also some really brilliant people working on, could we actually deliver gene therapy that would actually work despite your inhibitor? In other words, by making a continuous level of factor sort of act as an immunologic suppressant of your inhibitor, just an immunogenicity approach. The sky's the limit.
Okay, we've talked about CRISPR in the past. It's like snip, cut, paste. And I know Dr. Ragney makes it sound straightforward. But what's really exciting is the direction this points us in. More precision, more personalization, and maybe one day options for people who've historically had limited choices, like patients with inhibitors. And honestly, a lot of this innovation is being driven by something extremely relatable. People are tired of infusions. They want freedom. They want predictability. And that desire pushes the science forward.
I know some people go, I'm just so fed up with this hemophilia IVs every week or every couple days or whatever it is. And actually that does drive a lot of the interest. Of course, we want to make our lives more livable, more cured, more dependable, less risky, more enjoyable, whatever all the right words are. And so we really want to be sure we're doing this right. To get these things. And so that maybe is rule number one of everything anyone does, whether it's on a trial or whether it's in your own office where you're starting gene therapy. The patient is the center of the issue. This is about equity. Patients are talking to the physicians, to their families, to the nurses, to whomever they feel most comfortable with, or maybe the group. But we collaborate, we work together to understand it.
At the center of all this progress, whether it's viral vectors, CRISPR, gene transfer, or future technologies that we haven't even imagined of yet, it's collaboration. Patients talking with clinicians, clinicians talking with researchers, and the community pushing for safe, effective, accessible therapies. That spirit of collaboration is actually showing up globally with organizations like the International Society on Thrombosis and Hemostasis, European Association for Hemophilia and Allied Disorders, and WFH, emphasizing equitable access as part of the future landscape. Now, hemophilia has led way in gene therapy, but researchers are starting to expand that map.
I really do think also that a personalized approach by far has the potential to really give us better levels that are more durable, that, are not so variable because they're going to be geared to you. Now, is that a reality? Not yet. We're talking preclinical. But what I'm saying is these things are out there, and I've read a lot about them, and I think there's a lot of excitement about what might be. So I am not saying they are there, and I'm saying, but so that's sort of what we're talking about. But it's very variable. I do not want to give you one size fits all, because there's, to my knowledge, no such thing.
One of the unknowns we are exploring today is, could gene therapy work for other rare coagulation disorders? Conditions like von Willebrand's disease are much more complex biologically, and because fewer people have them, trials take longer to recruit and compete. But the early science, including new RNA and CRISPR-based approaches, shows that it might be possible someday. And as Dr. Ragney says, the sky is really the limit.
There's some really cool new therapies coming down the pike. They'll be in clinical trials. So you can do a trial. I mean, if you feel comfortable enough and there's enough data to make us think that it may be effective for you, or certainly is safe and may be effective, then that's what we might want to do. How should we advocate? I mean, again, that's not my area, but I am very willing to work with folks so that we can make sure that the best opportunities are out there for our patients, for heaven's sake.
So where does this leave us? Well, we have proven durable gene therapy for hemophilia B with 5 years of safety and efficacy data behind it. We have next generation technologies like CRISPR and RNA editing getting closer every day. And we have researchers exploring brand new frontiers for other rare bleeding disorders. There's still a lot we don't know, and honestly, that's the exciting part. Exploring the unknown is where that breakthrough happens. This has been another episode of Gene Therapy, a whole new world, brought to you by CSL Behring and BloodStream Media. Until next time, it's your girl Hannah, and remember, science may write the script, but the people make it worth reading.
Now, Mark, trivia question for you. Do you remember who kicked off part 2 of our Blood Brotherhood segment?
I believe it was Sid in California.
That is correct. It's where we would play the big fancy noise sound effect that Keith is going to insert. And do you have any guesses who will be kicking off part 3?
I believe that will also be Sid from California.
That's correct. You nailed it. Way to go, Sid in California. He's got all the timing. We'll pick up again with Sid in California right after this. This next segment is brought to you by Genentech. If you're living with a bleeding disorder like hemophilia A, staying active may be important to you. I know it is to me. Genentech gets it, and they're excited to help connect you with their team and with the vibrant community of people living with hemophilia A. Genentech offers one-on-one support from experts and provides resources where you can hear real stories from people living with hemophilia, learn about events that you can go to, and discover how the hemophilia community manages physical activity with a bleeding disorder. Everyone's experience is different, but there is no substitute for the support of a community that truly understands life with hemophilia A. To meet members of the community and to hear more about their hemophilia A journey, head over to www.hemophiliacommunity.com. Sid, you are up next, followed by DJ and then Mark.
Okay, hello. Thanks again for letting me share. I kind of wanted to just touch some more on just advocating for yourself, and I guess to make people just more aware that advocating means more than just knowing what you have to say about your hemophilia. It means knowing what your rights are as a patient and what the expectations are of your hemophilia treatment center to help you navigate this very complicated issue that we all have to navigate and dealing with the day-to-day. Just be ready to, when the people that, have been there to back you up, can't back you up, have a new way that you can get what you need to, and always be prepared is what I would say. Because I'm running up against those issues where hematologists, people in the community, people very, knowledgeable in our disease are just unable to or unwilling to do the things that I've had them help me with in the past. And it's been kind of hard to deal with because it means a lot of life-changing things for me, physically, emotionally, everything. The second thing I wanted to talk about was the complicated grief, kind of, well, one of the things to what the gentleman was sharing before about being scared of having a family. I understand that. And like I said, I have a 6-year-old son. And I worry about the same things, like I did before we had him. What are my limitations? What is he going to do seeing me get hurt? He's sadly, a majority of his 6 years, I've been in and out of hospital. So he's had to visit me when he was 2 during COVID. I was in the hospital for 2 months. So he remembers coming to visit dad in the hospital. He's seen me get surgeries. He knows I'm limited, but he loves me like nothing else. So if that's something that's keeping you from it, just know the little ones will always love you no matter what. They got you. And another thing on that sense is in August, I lost my dad. He passed away, and it's kind of brought it to reality. I always knew that I wouldn't have as much time with my son, but it's kind of brought it into perspective that in order for him to have me the same time I had my dad, it'd be 37 more years I'd have to live. I'm 37 now. So the odds that pretty low. So just knowing that and knowing that my wife is going to have to go through what my stepmom's going through and stuff is hard to deal with. But I'm, like I said, every day I'm grateful that I have my wife and my family and they help me get through it. Those are the complications we kind of deal with at this point in our lives that kind of don't get addressed or spoken up. So make sure you share them. They're important. That's about it.
Well said, Sid. Thank you for sharing them. Appreciate that. DJ, you are up next, followed by Mark and then Ryan. Go ahead, DJ.
Perfect. Thank you. I just wanted to say all of your guys' stories have really resonated with me tonight. I was really anxious getting into this just because, forums like this, sharing stuff can be real personal. So I just wanted to touch a bit more on like the complicated grief that can come with bleeding disorders. For me personally, it all kind of started when I was younger. All of my hematologists were, I'm sure for most of you, were also oncologists. So like sitting in those offices, you get to meet cancer patients and whatnot. And when you have those conversations with them, it's just real humbling because you're seeing the same doctors, but you're not there for the same thing, right? And so they almost feel that remorse for you because they think you're there for the same thing. So it kind of gives you that like that guilt almost. You're like, well, I just have a bleeding disorder, like it can't be that bad, right? And then like for me, my journey of getting treatment was rough. So anytime I'd go to the doctor, they'll be like, well, you have von Willebrand's disease. You're not like a hemophiliac. You don't bleed the same. So then you kind of like, it makes your journey almost feel inauthentic, right? Because what you're going through, if everybody's telling you the whole time that it's not happening, you're like, well, then you can't relate to everybody else because it's just very isolating. So when I got connected with the community and I got to meet others, got to meet my friends and whatnot, and got to share those stories, kind of just allowing myself to be validated in my experience and for them to like welcome me with open arms, be like, no, like our journeys are the same at the end of the day. Like this is who we are. Like this is always going to be a part of us. It doesn't necessarily define who we are, but it is a major part of it. And that just really allows you to kind of cope with that grief. But also in the same, it almost hurts because I hear the stories of everybody going through the AIDS crisis and everything, everybody with hemophilia, and majority of the time hemophilia is worse than von Willebrand's disease. So like you guys just get it worse than historically than I have. So it's like that survivor's guilt of like, I almost feel like my journey isn't as defining as your guys's is, if that makes sense to a degree. Like I don't know. It's complicated. And I kind of had to allow myself to be like, well, that's like the negative aspect of it, right? Like that don't invalidate what you've gone through just because it might not be to the same degree as everybody else's, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't as hard for you personally. And with that, kind of how everybody was touching on like the idea of fatherhood, it's the same ideas crossed my mind too. It's like, well, do I want to put somebody else through the same things I've gone through? And thankfully, I had my little brother, my little sister, my mom to kind of go through that journey with me. But like, if I was the only sibling to have it and I didn't know anybody like I did myself until I was 14, I don't know if I could do that to somebody else. So I just kind of wanted to share that.
Well, thanks for sharing, DJ. And I was glad to hear you come around to the part about not invalidating your own experience, because you're right. There's no real benefit to comparing who's had a greater burden, who's had it harder. That it's neither here nor there. We've all had our own experience. It's had its own share of burden and trouble, and there's no point in comparing, in my opinion. So I was glad to hear you come around to that and appreciate you being so open. Mark, you're up next, sir, followed by Ryan and then Wendell. Go ahead, Mark.
Thanks, Patrick, for addressing that. Actually, because DJ, it's a big thing, especially with Blood Brotherhood. This again, the space. This is not a competition. This is not like trying to hear someone's story and be like, "Oh, my story's not as bad, so it's not as worth telling." That's every story. Like I said at the beginning, is important. If it's important to you, if it's something that impacts your life, it's important. Bar none. Period. So I'm glad that you came around, but I do want to make that statement that this is what this kind of space is for, at the very least, to talk about these things. I'm really happy that, happy is a subjective term, but like that people are resonating with the concept of complicated grief. I will give a plug that it was a concept that I found out about 2 years ago at an HFA symposium prior, this was before me working there. And like Ryan said, like when I first saw it, I was like, oh my God, I latched onto it. I latched onto this concept. I read all that I could about it. I talked to the presenters afterwards. I couldn't consume enough about that concept. And yeah, I felt like it explained not everything, but a good chunk of how I think, why I think, the way that I think, the coping mechanisms that I built up to deal with those things. Because, when I think of complicated grief, Anthony, thank you for the vulnerability, because I thought the same exact thing. And those same exact thoughts. I'm not going to rehash them, but I'll just say that how much time I spent in my teens and in my 20s having those thoughts, what that kept me from getting excited about, what kind of I think back on the relationships that I didn't pursue because of that fear. I think about the complicated grief concept, when I think about things like as simple, we talk about, oh, you can't play in sports when you're younger. If you don't like sports, that's fine. But I felt like it took away my ability to make that choice for myself. And what could I found out about myself? Things like accountability. I feel like we're accountable to ourselves to manage our condition, our parents, our loved ones, our providers. But something as basic as sports, as like a normal life experience, the one thing that I found just by kind of watching it later in life was holding other people accountable. Like these basic social skills, these basic kind of human experiences and human emotions that I feel like we don't realize are being denied from us because of our condition, and how we built around those, like coping with that. We talked about suicide ideation. I think about that a lot. I think about it all the time too. And I've learned to not mention that at treatment centers, because I think about suicide kind of all the time as like a passing thought. Like, oh, I wish I should just kill myself, or like, I want to die. Life would be better if I was dying. But it's not like I think about like, oh man, it's like, I got to kill myself. It's like, no, letting the thought pass by, acknowledging them having it pass by. That's something I've learned on my own. But I've also found, like I was trying to say, don't tell that to healthcare providers, because that triggers so many things. You get all these calls from social workers, but it all goes to these things. Like all of these things you have to figure out, you have to learn, you have to go through that. Like a normal or unaffected, because normal is not the right term, unaffected person who has never had any context with the scope and level of something like a condition, like a rare, like a bleeding disorder, hemophilia, or something, who will just be so overwhelmed by it. I've been told by psychiatrists, because I've tried to see therapy, like, this is very overwhelming. And I've had psychiatrists tell me that. I'm just like, all right, then I'm just going to keep doing my own thing, because this is not going to work. But all that to say, again, it is a huge topic. I hope to see more development in it, especially in our community, because I think it's so pervasive and I want to talk about it more. So thank you guys for just, again, resonating with it and sharing about it.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate you, man. Ryan, you are up next, followed by Wendell and then Hector.
I don't know if you guys saw me kind of perk up when you started talking about children. So I do have a 15-year-old son, big fan of the kid. Interestingly, so wife and I come from evangelical tradition where lots of people have like 7 or 8 kids. So we're kind of looked down upon for only having one. And so for it recently came up, we were kind of talking about our journey, and I talked about when we were planning to have our first when I got sick, like really my liver, it was getting to edging on cirrhosis. So I started treatment. So we had to stop, of course. This was back in the old days of interferon treatment. So you couldn't, you had to make sure protection, no kids for a while. And it's, here's my point, I guess, that I'm getting to. I felt really guilty about that. And I felt really burdened by that. And I went to my wife recently and we were talking about it. And although I know she is, sad that, because I'll tell you guys a secret, her password for a number of years was want 2 kids. We only have one. So failed on that. But, for what I had kind of carried with me, turns out she was just like, you know what? That's the cards we were dealt. So I cannot encourage enough in speaking with your spouse about that or your partner about that, just because they may look at it differently. And I am in no way trying to give advice. I'm no way an expert, but it was such a relief, such a burden lifted that I was just another thing that I was kind of adding on, because much like, any therapist will tell you, if you have one thing, then, you kind of like to, pile other things on top of that to make yourself feel bad. And being able to take something off was very freeing. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks for sharing, Ryan. Wendell, you are up next, then Hector, and then Mirali. Go ahead, Wendell.
Okay. I'd like to expand on 2 issues. The first one is the insurance. The insurance is a real issue. And the reason I'm going to say that is just a year ago, I already said I was on the Hemlibra treatment and I was giving it to myself at home. But then every year, every January, the insurance, at least from the private carrier, they redo their formularies. So they redid the formulary for the Hemlibra, and they said I had to go to an infusion center. So while they're trying to hash this out, I was off the Hemlibra for about 3 or 4 months before they determined where I could get the treatment. During those 3 or 4 months, I actually had 6 bleeds. So anyhow, they ended up saying you can get the treatment, but you got to go to the infusion center. Well, from April of 24 until October of 24, I went to the infusion center. And then November, it was time to get my shot again. And they said, we're not going to pay for it. And the 10 months that you've been going to the treatment infusion center, we're not paying for that either. So the hospital in Toledo, Ohio, they sent me a bill for $1,877,000. So you can imagine when you get a bill like that, it's like, okay, now how am I going to pay for this? Well, long story short, I filed the grievance, and that's going through the process right now. And it's looking like the insurance is going to pay for that. So that's the blessing in disguise. But insurance issues are real. And then the other thing I want to expand on is, like I said, I was an engineer in the auto industry for about 40 years. My last job, which I ended up having to go out on disability in 2023. I had a couple of jobs throughout the 40 years that I was discriminated against because of my disease. The one CEO president, he actually got the insurance bills in his office it was a private pay situation. So they determined who's costing us this much money. They ended up finding out who that was. Lo and behold, downsizing, right? Who's the first one that's going to get cut? The guy that has all the insurance bills. So that was that. And then in 2023, my last employer that I was working with, I was having lots of bleeds, and I was starting to wear a brace because the orthopedic surgeon and my hematologist said, Wendell, why are you having all these bleeds? And I said, well, I'm working 6, 7 days a week, 12, 15 hours a day. They said, well, you can't do that anymore. You're going to damage your body even more. So they said, why don't you start wearing a brace to work? I did that. Keep in mind, this is in 2023, 2 years ago. My boss at the time said, we're going to get you some help, but it's going to be it's going to be a temporary situation while you're wearing that fake brace. And I thought, okay, well, here we go again. Obviously, I was upset. I came home, talked to my wife. She said, you've been doing this 40 years. I was 60 at the time. I wanted to go to 63 and a half, pay Cobra for the last year and a half till I got 65. 2023, there's still that mindset of disabilities. Yeah, we have the ADA Act, but I can tell you there's still discrimination going on. What I would like to do, I live in Bowling Green, Ohio. What I'd like to do is go to, I don't know, Chamber of Commerce, manufacturing roundtables, any type of roundtable to discuss with people that disabilities are real. And you can't, in this day and age, you cannot continue with that mindset of calling people wearing fake something. You're crippled, you're handicapped, you're of no use to us. We have to cut you loose. And I'm so thankful that I have this forum to be open because I'm thinking I've did this 40 years. What is my purpose? I've lost 4 of my family members. Is my purpose to spread the word, to get out in the public and explain that people with disabilities are just trying to get by like everybody else? It doesn't matter if it's a bleeding disorder. It doesn't matter what your handicap is. We're all just trying to survive. So is that my calling? I don't know. But I know I'm able to talk freely more, not necessarily in this forum. This forum is great, but I'm talking more and more out in the public about my disability. And I guess the takeaway is, yeah, it's 2025, but even 2 years ago, the mindset is still out there that people with disability are, I don't know, considered throwaways. I don't know. But it's real, guys. And I appreciate everybody's time tonight. Mark and Patrick, thank you so much for pulling this together. And it's been very helpful.
Well, thank you. And thank you for sharing, Wendell. Appreciate you. Hector, you're up next, then Murali and Mickey. Go ahead, Hector.
One of the topics I wanted to talk about is the transition to fatherhood and a bit of guilt, being now a person that has lived through different experiences and bringing a child into the world. When my daughter was born in 2024, I experienced this open can of mental health situations, anxiety, just a lot of things that I never had to cope with. I mean, I thought I had a good hold with my bleeding disorder, but now I thought to myself, what kind of life is she going to have if the responsibility of being alive, of having a job with health insurance, taking care of her needs, of her bleeding disorder needs. And when I watched the movie Dismissed, it really just gave me this, as a father, it really brought into perspective what you want to prevent for your daughter and what you want her to learn. And that you know that there are people out there, women who are role models and who are making a difference. But also as a father, what is going to be my role? Because growing up with the bleeding disorder, sometimes you get kind of used to people taking care of you. And now you are the one who has to take care of somebody on top of having your own health issues. So that brought a lot of anxiety. I think for the first time in my life, I went to see a therapist. Never done that before, but I really wanted to highlight this to me, this space, these conversations are the best therapy that I had. And I spent thousands of dollars managing health insurance and justifying why I was seeking a therapist every week. Just 1 or 2 sessions of this has had a more profound impact than a year of therapy. And I really just always want to just express that, because having to explain to somebody about your history, your background and all these kinds of things that you experience in your life, it's not the same as talking to people that have gone through it and you can learn from, and we can support each other. So definitely for me, the birth of my daughter, it just really opened so many things where it impacted my life so much, where I couldn't even drive. I was afraid to drive on the freeway. I was afraid to drive on bridges, on mountains, almost having panic attacks in the car. But also because I was stressed out that if I lost my job that I had, I would be putting everybody down. I would fail my daughter. We would not have health insurance. I work in education. I'm a teacher. And I'm blessed to have a system where I have insurance, and factor hasn't really been an issue. But education now, it's not the same it's been. It's a very stressful job to teach. And there have been times when I thought about quitting, about just walking away from my job, but the guilt of doing that, because now I'm affecting the lives of others besides myself.
I hear you, Hector. I hear a lot of that. Thanks for sharing, man. Morale, you're up next, and then Mickey. Go ahead, Morale.
Just last week, I did not know or even think that I would ever have an opportunity or be called upon to do something like this. Genetic counseling, unbelievable, because this was, and I'm not a trained person. I'm an IT person. I'm not trained. I'm a patient of hemophilia. So a patient talked, and his wife, who already have a son, were asking me, is it wise to have a second child? Was asking me just because I was older. And the other thing, they were asking me whether it should be natural or IVF or what would be the right way. They were asking me of all the people, and I had to, in a half-hour call, I had to try and explain to them what I would think is the pluses and minuses of each. Eventually, I had to redirect them that final word has to come from your physician, what they think, and what is then this is my opinion, and I had to leave it at that. I haven't heard back for a week, so I'm hoping that they would consult with other people who are more trained. But this is just an example of the level of advocacy that people in the community look up to you if you're an aging person in an age with hemophilia. They may ask you because they are uncomfortable bringing it up at their treatment center or with their families, but they're comfortable talking to another patient with hemophilia.
Thank you, Murali. And my big takeaway from that is if anyone has questions about childbirth, I'll be referring them to my favorite IT person in the greater Chicago area. That's my biggest takeaway. So thank you for that little bit of information. Mickey, the floor is yours.
As I've listened to everybody speak, I've just been taking little notes here and there on just a couple little tidbits to share. I know someone mentioned about driving 4 to 8 hours. One thing I suggest there is remove your wallet if you keep a wallet in your back pocket, because that'll help you button your hips. But one thing I like about hemophilia, if you let it get the best of your mind, it could be a curse. But we shouldn't do that because one of the blessings of hemophilia for me that I see, and I think it's what makes a lot of us so great, is it puts a passion in us that most people don't have. And the empathy that somebody mentioned earlier, that most people don't have these days. Whether it's coming from growing up in an HTC or a hospital, like someone had mentioned, sitting next to the kid with cancer. You start to think that, wow, I don't have it so bad. But we shouldn't compare ourselves, but we do. But just never invalidate your situation. There's no scale on who suffers the most, is the best, or the hardest, or the toughest, and all that stuff. And then on a side note, it's like you listen to some people though, it's like the stuff they whine about. It's like, come on, are you guys serious? What, are you serious? That bothers you? If they could only get in our heads, right? And see what struggles we face. But that's why I try to teach my kids is just never judge a person, no matter their circumstance, whether they're homeless, strung out on drugs, never judge a person, because in a split second, that could be one of us. We could end up with those situations. And I haven't really shared much of my story as far as how I guess, I don't know. I'll just give a quick rundown. So I'm from Ohio. My mom passed away in 89 and I moved to LA. And that was the whole time of the HIV was a big thing, Ryan White and all that. Well, when I moved out here with my brother, DCFS took me from it, but they couldn't find a place to place me because of HIV. No foster home, no group home, nobody would take me in. Luckily, they stumbled upon an agency back then. It was called GLASS, Gay and Lesbian Adolescent Social Services. And they was the only community that was open to that. And so that just sprung up in my mind when he was talking about being gay and having kids and all that stuff. I hope it's never crossed your mind not to have kids because you're gay. I hope that has never crossed your mind, because my foster parents were awesome and I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be here today without them. And your decision not to have kids, decisions aren't final. You can always change them. Kids are resilient. I've had some of the same questions and, what is it going to be like putting them in this situation with a dad who has hemophilia? And then with two girls who have hemophilia, what did I do to them? How could I have done that? But they learn a lot and they're very resilient and their brains are different than ours. So they'll get through it. I can promise you that. And never compare yourself as far as battles go to each other, because everybody in the world has battles. Everybody struggles, whether they have hemophilia or not. Everybody's facing something. But that goes once again, just don't compare yourself. And I've been, I deal with a lot of depression. I have over the years. To this day, I do. But one thing we should never do is never feel hopeless, because we all have each other. And Patrick and Mark, thank you for this opportunity, because it is greater than going to a regular therapist. Even though it doesn't happen as much, I can go to therapy every day this week, and I can only do this once in a while. The reward is so much better, because it's like sitting in a room at HFA. We could just sit there and be totally silent, but we get it, and we can feel each other's emotion, and we can understand. And sometimes silence is just enough. So that's all I want to say. Thank you, guys.
Beautiful message, Mickey. If anybody has a burning desire to say anything else, this would be the opportunity. I see Steve raising his hand. Steve, go ahead. Take yourself off mute.
Yep, that's what I just did. I'd like to make a pitch for women. I was amazed to hear of two mothers who were diagnosed in the 50s and treated with hemophilia. That is astonishing. We only had data in 1972 from Dr. Mary Lyon about the X chromosome and the fact that women could have hemophilia. I've been very active at Fair Time for Women. I'm on their advisory board. Patrick is very familiar with it. Several of you other guys are. We're making very good progress. HFA and NBDF have worked together on some of this, which is outstanding. In fact, when Ashley Gregory and Ray Toley founded Fair Time for Women, that was our major goal, was to get the major bodies to stop stovepiping and work together. We're seeing a lot of that. The World Federation is getting heavily involved as well. And so it's up to us blood brothers to help our blood sisters. So I just want to make a pitch for that. I think it's, I have two nieces and a grandniece. By the way, my grandniece Anna is the Colorado program director now. And so, and Laurie, my niece, her aunt, used to run HFA's Learning Institute. The women are involved. They are vulnerable. They need treatment. Even Laurie, a great advocate, has had trouble getting her factor. So it continues to be a problem for women. It's being worked on. If you have any chance to get involved, with your HTC, with your member organization or chapter, please do.
Thank you, Steve. Good message. Mark, as we start to wrap up the recording here, is there anything that you want to share from an HFA perspective or anything that you want to just say to the group?
Yeah, again, thank you all. And I do have to say, again, this was actually, so the concept of the podcast, obviously this is Patrick's bill. This was his brainchild of collaborating with us. He proactively reached out to HFA. He and I kind of worked through together for the topics or just kind of a flow of everything. But from HFA's perspective, I do want to give a thank you to you, Patrick, and BloodStream for allowing this kind of platform to happen. I think we're all had an opportunity to really share parts of ourselves that maybe we don't get the chance to all that often. Like I said before, just kind of hearing and listening to your stories and kind of watching you guys speak, these ones on camera, or even just the tone, hearing, I feel like a little bit lighter. And I hope that you can carry that for a little while longer. I know that once we get off this call, real life happens, and life is just, we'll always find something new. And we're more than our bleeding disorders, and life will never let you forget that. But in terms of just this experience, thank you all.
It sounds so silly, but I'll just be honest. This is something of a dream come true for me, wanting to bring the Blood Brotherhood into the BloodStream world. These are the dreams I have, guys. We all have our own dreams. These are my dreams. So, the fact that the 18 of us are here is what makes it real. And Mark, I meant what I said there at the end, that this little collaboration between BloodStream and the Blood Brotherhood, which you personally have helped make happen, has been something of a dream come true for me. I've been thinking about it for a long time. This finally seemed like the time to execute it, and it only happened because you said yes. So thank you for everything you did to make this happen.
Oh, thank you for the kind words, Patrick. I really appreciate that. On behalf of the Hemophilia Federation of America, obviously we can't thank you and Believe Limited and BloodStream Media enough for your support in our Blood Brotherhood program, for giving us this platform to expand the voice and awareness of our Blood Brotherhood program. And we're hoping that this will just lead to more participation and more engagement within Blood Brothers. And on a personal level, Patrick, I have to thank you for, allowing me to be here, to be your co-host. These 4 topics are incredibly important to me personally.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to my role as the currently Director of Health Equity and Community Engagement, I was a consultant for HFA as the Blood Brotherhood coordinator, moderator, consultant. And these are the 4 topics that I really wanted to have a chance to talk about because I have experience with all of them. They've all shaped a part of me and how I kind of view my experience with a bleeding disorder and working in it, living with it, managing it, all of it. So to be able to speak on it and be a part of it in this way and with this magnitude, I can't thank you enough. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. It was a perfect match, it sounds like. I also want to send a huge thank you to all of the Blood Brothers who joined us for what became this really special 3-part series here on BloodStream. I appreciate all the openness, vulnerability, and support that was on display. It made for an exceptional event and segment series. It's been real, and Mark, I've enjoyed co-hosting these with you. Thanks for coming here in studio to do this with me.
Likewise, thanks for having me, and it's been so much fun. But I will enjoy hearing Amy back on the mic next month.
Yes, Amy is going to be invited back into the studio after all, although I think we found a good rotating guest host if we ever need to give her a vacation. Amy and I will be back on January 9th, New Year, same us. And with that, that is all for this episode and this year on BloodStream. If you're new to the show, please do subscribe to the BloodStream podcast, leave us a review, and follow BloodStream Media on social media. You can also email us to pitch topics or guests and to inquire about casting opportunities, mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. I am your host, Patrick James Lynch.
I'm your guest host, Mark Pangolina.
And until next time, take self-care of yourself. Happy 2026. Bye, everybody.